Hi there. Today we're going to run through our P6-QA tool. And this tool works with P6 and it hunts down problems and deficiencies in your schedule. So I'm Nicole Jardin. I'm coming to you from Calgary. And I have actually Mary Lynn with me. I don't have your slide, Mary Lynn. Mary Lynn with me doing the actual presentation. And she's going to show you P6-QA live in action. So let me explain why we built the software tool. Okay, so we as Emerald would get hired to do schedule critiques, analyze people's schedules, and we always found that a very frustrating part of our work because we were usually called in because there was a deadline, a gate that needed to be met, and people would give us their schedule, and we'd have a very short time frame to actually try and look at it, not knowing anything about the project often. And so we just found it really frustrating. So we thought there's got to be a better way to do this. So we started to put together the P6-QA tool. And this tool runs right inside of P6, and it helps you look at what are quality metrics that it's looking at. Okay, so it looks at what you've put into the schedule, and it gives you feedback as to whether you've got a quality schedule. Now, quality and what is a good schedule, that's always an interesting conversation when you get with a group of scheduling folks. There's always very different thoughts and attitudes to what is good and what is not good. So we're trying to set some standards, and you can set the standards within your organization. So we're looking at timing. So we're looking at activities, their durations, the sequence, the logic. If you're using resourcing, you can use that part of it. So we'll look at the budgeted quantities and actuals, and whether or not you've put in updates and things like that. So we look at the resources. And if you're using costs, of course, you can look at the cost components as well. So they're very similar to resourcing components, whether or not you've got budgets and actuals and things of that nature. So they tend to be quite similar. So the idea here is to be able to produce a more reliable and consistent schedule. Okay, if you've worked in a larger group with different skill sets, and even if you've worked on a larger project where you've got different contributors, the way a schedule is put together can vary considerably. So we're trying to get a better quality product, more consistent approach, something that you can critique yourself on a regular basis, so we get these bottlenecks, these review bottlenecks out of the way. Okay, so you're not leaving it to the last minute before your stage gate. You're actually able to self-critique as you're working or as you're receiving schedules from a contractor as well. Or if you're providing a schedule to an owner, you can self-critique before you give it, especially if you know what some of their critiquing criteria is. You can put them into your own QA environment. So the idea is this makes it go smoother. You're evaluating your logic and things like that much more regularly, avoiding some of these panics and these bottlenecks that can occur. Now, P6-QA goes far beyond the out-of-the-box schedule check that's inside of P6, and I think they added it maybe at version 22. They actually have a few buttons that do schedule checks that are, in my opinion, really, really frustrating, messes about with your layout, and you don't know you got filters on. So I don't really love what they've done in the client, but they do have some of the checks. But our tool goes way beyond those checks because you can add your own business process checks. So you can check things like whether you've got your mandatory codes assigned. So there's a lot of additional items that we can evaluate. Things like calendars, we can look at calendars and give you a critique of calendars, etc. So our tool goes much beyond what's out of the box inside of P6. And the idea here is to allow you to do it yourself, right? So you don't have to call companies like us in, spend a lot of money on us critiquing it. You can do it yourself, and you can do it on a regular basis, and you don't have to have your lead schedulers always a pinch point in the middle of the process. So that's really what we were going for. And you don't have to have a very expensive software tool set aside just for your lead schedulers. Okay, this is shared amongst everyone in P6. That's really was our objective. It was to make it much more part of your regular routine. So how does it work? So the way that it works as a user, okay, as a user of QA, all the data is sitting inside of P6. So we use out-of-the-box types of fields, codes, UDFs, to allow you to set up what you want to critique, to give you that comfort and that flexibility to set the criteria right inside the app, and then you see the results right inside the app. Okay. Now we also, in the last few versions, we've added the ability to push the metrics out into P6 Reporter, and we built some Power BI examples because some of our clients wanted that. So we built some preset examples. So if you have both tools, they're both our tools. If you have both of those tools, you can use them and get the metrics out. Okay. If you don't have P6 Reporter, you can look at getting it, or you can also take some of the reports right out of the screens in P6. So Marilyn will show you that. We've got notebooks of all the metrics. So what do we look at? As I mentioned earlier, we're obviously going to look at the schedule, because 100% of the people using P6 are using it for scheduling. So we look at things like, do you have missing logic? Do you have positive and negative lags or leads and lags? How are your durations? Do you have very long activities, or do you have activities that are too long based on your project criteria? Okay, so if you've got a turnaround project that's 30 days, or if you have a capital project that's 10 years, it's quite a bit different what a long duration would look like. Okay. Now, when you're looking at schedule, you're also going to look at things like, do I have a lot of constraints? What kind of constraints? Are they what is called a hard constraint or a soft constraint? Now, you can look at the resourcing and costing as well. Okay, that might be a criteria for you. You might be mandated to have resource loaded schedules and cost loaded schedules. So we'll critique that. Now, not only do we critique what you're putting in for the plan, we have to, of course, critique as you do updates. Okay, so we'll critique and give you feedback while you're doing updates as well. So in the marketplace, there are various standards out there, and depending on who you work with, you may have to meet some of those standards, or you might be critiquing to those standards. So our tool works against multiple standards: the DCMA, the GAO, AAC, PMI, Naval and Air Force standards. So we've got the bulk of them covered within our tool. Okay, and then if there's something additional you want to add, you can, because as I mentioned, we've got the business process capability. Okay, so you can critique things at the project level, at the activity level, at the WBS level, at the resource expense and steps level. So we can critique all the levels, just depending on what you want. Okay, so that brings you a lot of flexibility. So if you've got a CapEx, OpEx, or a shutdown, turnaround, outage kind of project, you can hit the standards and put those standards in to P6-QA. And then if you've got different kinds of projects, like IT projects, long-range projects, again, you'll be able to meet the different types of projects and standards required, and different phases. So when you're just at the proposal stage, your critiquing might be a little bit more flexible, a little, and then as you get into your project's approved and you need to really double check and make sure all the standards are hit, you can lock those down a little bit more. Okay, so it gives you that flexibility to modify the standards as needed, depending on the phase of the project that you're in as well. Okay, so I think I'll hand it over to Mary Lynn, and she will do a deep dive and show us the tool in action. So I'm sending it over to you here, Mary Lynn.
Okay. According to my screen, my mic is on, so I hope everybody can hear me okay?
We can.
Okay.
Okay.
I'm just going to share my screen and we'll get going here. Okay, before we head right into P6, just wanted to give you a little bit of a look at some of the reporting, and these are just some of a lot of potential reports you can create. We'll have a look at the reports, then we'll go look at the specific pieces of data and where they're coming from. So I've got DCMA stacked bar. So what this is we have the ability to check a schedule and then send the results of that check into a snapshot, which feeds these reports. So you can get a bird's eye view basically of what does this look like? Where do I have problems? That kind of a scenario. So just to look at the one report here, activity validation summary. So red, of course, is failing. Well, logic missing. Looks to me like I've got a lot of logic here in this particular case that I would need to go and fix, that type of a scenario. Now, we'll look as well. You can set up in P6-QA whether I've got a fail flag, a warning flag, which is the yellow, or passing flag, which is the green. So we'll have a look at that as well. But you can see this very clearly gives you a very good high-level indication of which one of these checks that are on this particular report do we need to go and have a look at. Because you've got numbers, you can tell exactly where the failing pieces are. Same thing with relationship validations here. I've got some work I need to do. Now, there's a number of different reports that are available. So when that information gets pushed over, you can look at the information in a number of different ways. So this is average duration by start month, for example, average predecessor count by start month. So you can set up a lot of different reports in here. And I just wanted to give you a bit of a look at that report before we head into P6 itself. So I'm just going to minimize this. Just bear with me 1 second. I don't want to minimize the whole thing. There we go. And let's go into P6 and look at the tool. So when I go into P6, I've got a copy of a file here that I want to use to walk through some of these pieces of information. Now, first of all, I did mention that you can push this information out of your P6-QA checks into P6 Reporter. That is something that you can do just by columns sitting in your layout, similar to what we're looking at here for the last run for the QA. So once you've got your checks done, getting that information into a snapshot, if you have P6 Reporter, is not a labor-intensive exercise. It really is not. So what we want to do here, let's have a look at what this layout is showing us. This is schedule quality elements, and you can see how easy it is to see where we have issues. For example, here's a whole set of files. I can tell at a glance all of these files that we have on the screen right now have high float, that kind of a scenario. Now, how many fails have we got going on in these files? That's what this column behind is about. So you can slice and dice your information and look at it in a very, very large number of ways, depending on what works for you the best. Now, we'll go into the file itself and look at some of the checks, but Nicole mentioned that all of this information is available in reports. Well, if you select your file and you look at the notebook tab, you'll see this type of a scenario here. My notebook topics in this case are the P6-QA checks. So I've got business process is at the top here. I've got DCMA. I've got schedule quality validation. So I'm just going to click on schedule quality for a moment here. And it tells you when was the file last run, so built on. So this is in this particular file as of 5:40 p.m. Mountain Standard Time, basically. So when we want to look at these, I am just going to click modify so we can open this up and see what is actually in this report. Then we're going to go into the file and make some changes, rerun it, and you'll see that it does update your report. So if I want to look at different elements here, one of the very common ones that you're going to normally be looking at is, am I missing logic? So this is my schedule quality validations here. And if I go down the list, you can see I've got logic types, those kind of scenarios there as well. But I've got open ends, predecessors, open ends, successors. Whoops. And these fourth and fifth lines here, you can see I do have a problem with open ends on my successors. In other words, I've got activities that don't have a successor connection to them. Now, predecessors, I've got activities that have no predecessors. Well, those two elements alone, we're all aware of the fact that is going to wreak havoc with the float that your activities are showing as well. Well, it's going to check for float as well. But what I usually do is have a look at these two first. If I clean those up, of course, you might not be cleaning all of the float issues up, but you can usually look at some of them. Now, when you set up your parameters, you control what your targets are. So what are you actually looking for here? So for example, open ends predecessor, this is looking for 5% or less, basically. Now I've got 11.11%, which tells me, no, I've got some issues. So you can see why here as well. It flags it red as a fail, green if it's a pass. So that part is very, very easy to interpret. Now, if I want to find details on these elements at the top, all I have to do in any of these reports, I'm just using this one as an example. If I scroll down here, you'll see I've got logic open ends. If I go down a little bit farther, you can see each one of the checks has the details. Now, when I look at, here's my open ends predecessors, for example. When I look at the open ends predecessor here, it gives me what the parameters are. So what is it checking? What did it find? And it's telling me there is 27. Now you'll notice it's not showing 27 in the list because this report would get very, very long very quickly if you have a poor quality schedule to start out with, but it's giving you enough activities. When you look at any of these open-end successors, it's found 6. Sorry, that's my mistake. I should have said found 3. It did give you all 3. My mistake, sorry. So when we go to the open-end successor, it found 6. Now, it's telling us what those activities are. So if you've just got a few to clean up. You can see it pretty easy in the report. Now, this report also is something that you can run if you have to submit the checked report for a second set of eyes review kind of thing before you submit it. You've got the information here. If you need some help fixing any of these up, you can send the information to another scheduler, that kind of thing. This can be easily copy pasted into a Word document, for example, onto an email, that kind of scenario. Not necessarily all of it if you don't need to, but you can pick and choose the pieces. So I'm going to just close that for now. Now, if we go in and we look at what this particular project looks like, where are the issues that we're seeing? So if we go in and we look at our columns, we've got schedule quality checks in this particular layout, and you can create different layouts to show you exactly what you might find that on your schedule is a specific pain point, and focus it so you can easily focus in on that as well, or use a layout that you would get with P6-QA when it's installed. So if I go in here and I look at mining engineering here, I've got overall validation. I've got some fails on those activities under there. I've got logic missing. I've got 3 red stop signs. That tells me it's failed. So if I look at some more detailed check information here, if I look at open-end's predecessor, that's what's making that one fail. And by the way, this losing the information on when I click on that row, that's nothing to do with P6-QA. That's something that just started happening on my laptop. So if I look at the second activity here, it is failing open-end successors. In other words, there is no successor connected to this activity, and the one below it as well. So if we want to see what this looks like, if we fix these issues, and we can easily see where our issues are, because you can see it's very easy to see where your red stop signs are on this layout. But let's go in and fix the logic and have a look at what happens when I rerun it. So if I go into any one of these activities, and I'll just bring up the activity details. Now, this particular activity is missing a predecessor. These other 2 are missing successors. So if I go in and I want to fix the 2 with the open-ended successor, I can definitely do that. So what I'm going to do, the successor to this particular one, I'll connect it. And if I give the one above it a successor as well. So you can go in and you can do your edit link activities if they happen to fall. So you've got a nice waterfall that you need them all connected. So these 2 now have successors here. We're not going to see those icons change, the indicators, until we rerun the tool. Now, before we rerun the tool, I do have one predecessor missing. So if I click on the predecessor, and what we did, I actually have a predecessor now because of the logic I put in to the other 2. So once we run it, those should resolve themselves. Now, there is another thing that I want to mention. We'll come back to it. Sometimes you have activities in your schedule where they're failing a check, but there's a reason they're failing a check. So you may not want to have to go back through, check the red stop signs on your layout each time and go, oh, you know what? I looked at this already. Like, I don't need to keep looking at this. Plus the counts in your reports, you probably don't want that to keep showing up in your reports. And I'll show you in just a second how P6-QA gives you an avenue to look after that kind of information. So with the logic, so we'll focus on logic first here. Let's go back out and let's rerun the tool. So this is my file here. Now to rerun P6-QA, when you're running it, you can run it and you can see here in my QA frequency in this particular set of projects, you can run QA automatically. So I can set it up to run weekly, monthly, but in this case, I've got it set to manually because I want to be able to rerun it when I decide it's time. So what I want to do here is to rerun it. All I do is go in and remove the last run date and then click F5. And this is a fairly small file. It will not take a long time to run it. It's just going to run through the checks. There is, you can see by all the notebook documents here, there is quite a few checks that it does run through. Now, those checks you can pick and choose. You can shut down some of the checks if you choose that, okay, this doesn't apply to anything that we would necessarily be focusing on too much. But just some food for thought. We've started with logic, but there is a large number of different pieces that, depending on the environment you're in, some become a little bit more of a focus. Not that you wouldn't be wanting to close your logic, definitely you would be, but you may have some other elements that you need to actually focus on as much as the logic almost. So it's run again. So if I go and look at the file, you'll see it's built a new set of reports. Now, if I go in and I look at schedule quality, because that's where we were before, and I'm just going to click modify so we can see this in a decent size. Otherwise, it gets really tough to see the report if you've got it just in the tab itself. So if I go in and I'm looking for the changes in the numbers, I can definitely go in and look at the report. So depending on what you find easier, you're going to find open ends. Here's my predecessor. It's gone down. Here's my successor, and it's gone down as well. Now, we know that we've reduced it. We know we didn't completely fix it because there was some other activities with the same issues. So you can see that that's happened in the report. You can go down to the details and have a look there as well. Here's the open-end successors. There's now 4 in that file. So you can go through and look once you've rerun it in any of those reports. Now, if I want to go and see what it's done inside the file, I just need to go back to activities. And you can see this first section here. I have no red indicators in any of this logic piece where we had a number of them, just by going through and making sure there is logic sitting in there. So I could go through and do the same thing for the rest of them in the file. And you can see how easy it is to identify where your issues are and very easily go and have a look at, okay, what needs fixed here? What are we doing that we need to have a look at? Now, the next piece that I would like to show you, I just briefly touched on it before we went to run P6-QA. So if I have a situation where I've got something being flagged, now in this case, I've got a scenario where high duration, these two activities in the project control section are being flagged, they have high duration. Well, if I go to my activity details, I can very easily see this is a level of effort. And if I click down on the next, it's a level of effort as well. Well, it is very reasonable that you may have some level of efforts in your schedule that if you just run the high duration check, they're going to show up each and every time, which can get a little frustrating. So what you can do to indicate, I've looked at this and you know what, I'm okay with it. I understand why this activity has a long duration. Then I don't have to keep going back every time it's checked in P6-QA. I can simply go into where the check results, in other words, where this red icon is sitting, and I can click in there and set that as a blue star. Basically, what that does is it tells the software, okay, there was an issue there. I looked at it and I'm okay with it. For whatever the reason, because of whatever check it is, I know it's failing the check, but that's okay. It's been checked, it's been addressed. So if I put a blue star under high duration for these two level of effort activities, I will see this blue star each time I open this layout from now on, but it will also take that out of the count of fails in my schedule. So before we run that, this particular one is high duration. So I'm just going to go back to projects for a second. I just need to click on my open project and let's look at schedule quality. So if I look at the results for schedule quality, duration high, there's 8 right now in the file. We have fixed 2. So if I click modify, I can see the report a little better. It's going to give me exactly, of course, the same information. So if I'm looking at duration high, I've got 8, I fixed 2. So let's run this and see what that does to our report. And again, what you're going to see is those are going to be tagged with the blue star icon, but they're going to be taken out, basically out of the count there. So you have that option as well, because like I said, there is situations where you may want to flag logic, for example, that's going out of a start milestone because it's not going to be finished to start, that kind of scenario. So how you want to tag that is all under your control. You're not dealing with hard-coded checks on a file that gives you specific pieces of information, not in the format or flexible the way that you would actually like to see it. So this tool, you control what is being tagged, what isn't being tagged, if there is extenuating information in your schedule for your project, and you don't have to worry about that particular piece of information. So here's my duration high, and here you'll see I took 2 off. That's why I'm getting a 6 in that column. If I go to the top, that is remaining. So I have reduced the count by the 2 that I fixed. And if I close this, if I go back to my activities here, this, as I said, is still showing up, but you can look at it at any point and you know you've addressed it. It's not something that you have to do that, oh no, kind of a scenario with it. Now, when we're looking at the information, let's have a look at a slightly different layout. Let's go in. We can go in and look at, we did mention we can set up indicators. So we've looked at schedule quality. Now we could look at business process indicators. Now this is going to depend on how you set up your business process indicators, but I'm just going to give you a look at what that particular layout would look like. Now, if I'm looking at business process indicators, I can track activities not updated. I can track the activity ID format. I can track my activity type. What type are you saying it should be? How many activities have you got in here that aren't as they necessarily should be? So you've got a number of different checks that you can check. Now, one of the things I just wanted to mention here, when you go into specific checks that you want in your schedule, I'll give you a couple that I've run into many, many, many times, and they are not helpful when it happens. Now, you can set up things like checks in this particular tool so that you can see, do I have a number of activities that have exactly the same activity name? You can't duplicate activity IDs, we all know that, but you can enter supposedly hundreds of activities if that's what actually happened. Hopefully it doesn't happen to you or very often, because that would be very frustrating. But I've worked with turnaround schedules, and I've worked with construction schedules where, I'll give you an example. They're setting up scaffolding. So you run the reports, for example, for pre-work, and you end up with 8 or 10 pages of activities, and every one of them has an activity name that says erect scaffolding. And the reason I say that's not helpful is because I've seen it happen. I've seen it play out so many times. Your updates are likely not going to be correct, because what are people going to do? They are going to update the first erect scaffolding, and they're not going to split it up the way it needs to be.
I have that exact problem with the schedule I'm loading right now with a client. It's IT, and they have functional test, scripts, and I keep telling them we have to add what work package it's related to. So I have exactly that same problem. So it's a good example.
And the other, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off, Nicole.
No, I'm done. Thank you.
So the other one, just from kind of a real world reference, another one that I find is just absolutely nasty. Number one, if you've got a bunch of activities that end up with exactly the same name on them, well, you can't blame people for getting the wrong activity to do their updates, because they're likely not going to be able to tell the difference very well. Now, also, you can go in and check things like mandatory codes. I worked with one of our clients more than once on this, and now they're in line with checking it. But have you ever run off 2 weeks into a turnaround? You're running off management reports, and all of a sudden the numbers are sideways. That's happened several times. And what was happening is there's a coding structure in the file where each activity that fits a certain criteria gets a certain code. That pushes it to the management report. Now, I realize people can code things wrong. That wasn't the situation here. Those mandatory codes were not populated. So what they ended up with was a management report that had numbers missing. Like, basically, that there's no other way of putting it, is numbers missing. That's not a fun time either. Again, that's another check P6-QA will look after for you. So just giving you some food for thought in some of the things that I've come across. Nicole has indicated one of them she's come across, and I know she's come across more and more of that kind of scenario as well. So just food for thought. You can sidestep a lot of issues on your project by making sure that your schedule is quality. It's got the information in it, in the places it needs that information. Nothing gets sidestepped, nothing gets missed. So let's have a look at a little bit more information here. Now, what we want to do here, I'm back in the projects tab, And I'm just going to open another layout to give you a look at something else, that some more food for thought, what you can actually check. So let's look at schedule quality criteria. Now, I did mention you control the parameters of these checks. So if I decide that I am going to check for a specific parameter, I can set the parameters that I want it to check. Now, in case you're wondering what all these numbers are telling me, okay, I've got schedule quality high float percent. So all of these numbers in this column, for example, what percent are you considering acceptable? So over that percent, it's going to be a fail. That type of a scenario. So you control, because in some projects, you might think that just using a duration as an example. Now, if I'm working on a turnaround project, remaining duration of 5 days is going to probably be a big issue. If I'm working on a construction project, remaining duration on something that is 5 days may not even raise an eyebrow. So you can adjust exactly what you are asking the tool to check for you. So that's just something you want to be aware of. Now, if I go into, this is schedule quality criteria. We did look briefly at business process criteria as well. So if we look down, I've got another layout here, business process criteria. So what I want you to be very aware of, as you've seen as we go through, P6-QA is very flexible. It checks all your standard checks, but it also gives you the opportunity, as Nicole said, to introduce ones that are not normally in most of the software packages. Now, I wanted to mention the mandatory codes and the duplicate activity IDs, because as Nicole said, they have put a check schedule, a bit of functionality into the new version of P6. Those two are not there. That was one of the, I'll be honest, that's one of the first things I probably checked for. Now, you also, when you look at business process criteria here, I've just opened another layout so we can see some of the fields behind, setting up what the business process checks are doing. This is another one right at the beginning here, just 3 columns in, business process activity ID format pattern. Now, I worked a lot of years in the aircraft industry on the aircraft schedules, and they were big schedules, 85,000 activities and up. We had a breakdown of the activity ID. First 2 characters meant something, next 3 characters meant something, that kind of scenario. This lets you check exactly that. Do you have activity IDs in there that have just been put in with the click in P6 and add an activity kind of thing? So in which case you want to go fix it, because in that kind of a scenario, that activity is not going to end up where it needs to be in update reports or in management reports. So that particular piece is available as well. Here's your duplicate activity names, all of those types of scenarios, mandatory codes, all of those good checks that can just, if you keep it checked, keep it in line, fix what you need to fix, going to make your life a lot easier, a lot less stressful. So we do have, and sorry, I'm just looking at the time. What we want to look at as well is, let's go in and look at a file that's had some updates in it. I've had this particular conversation several times with people. When they first see P6-QA, a lot of people say, okay, fine. You need to check all that stuff when you're developing your schedule. Once you get it developed, you get your baseline set, you shouldn't need to run this anymore. Personally, I disagree with that. I've seen the value of running it. I'm not saying you have to run it once every hour or anything when you do updates in your schedule, but being able to run it can also give you some very easy, quick reference as to where do I have some issues. Now, this is still the layout with the business process indicators here. And we do have some red indicators, but let's look at an update layout, which is going to give us some of the ones that you could look at. It's not necessarily meant to be all the ones you probably want to look at. So if I look here, and you'll notice this one needs to be rerun, but just in the scenario at the top here, I ran the updates in my schedule. I've scheduled it, and I can go in here and look at these activities, and I can run these checks on every activity in my schedule. But if I look, for example, at this first red stop sign, actual date greater than the data date, that is something that is in your schedule report in P6. But do you want to have to delve through the schedule report? This is going to tell you there's a problem. Now, this one isn't a huge problem because if I look at my status here, the actual is the 3rd of June, 8 a.m. If I look at my schedule date, it's at 00. That's why it's picking it up. So it does evaluate it down to that particular amount of granularity. So you've got such a nice array of different checks that you can have running and checking your schedule. And all you have to do is go in, look for where the issues are, fix them, and then reschedule and issue your reports. And as I mentioned, it's going to make things a lot easier for you. Now, I've got another one sitting up here, resources over budget. That's one you want to pick up on real quick and find out exactly what's going on here. Here's another one, resource actuals. So if I look quickly at this particular one, this activity, if I go back to my status tab, is started. There's 0 duration percent. So somebody has updated to start this, but what it's flagging you is it's started and there's no actual units. So there's no resource usage. Now, there's another check that you can look at as well. Actual start, the activity is started and there is no percentage above 0, that kind of thing. So you can set up a number of different checks depending on what you feel is going to be most advantageous to you for the type of schedule you're running. How often is it updated? What parameters you're dealing with? But you can see from here that looking at the different pieces of information in P6-QA, very, very easy. It's very visual. You can see where the issues are right off the top. It's not a fight to try and find them. Now, if I go to the projects and I go back to the layout I was in, this one as well, when you're looking at your project, it gives you a bird's eye view, so to speak, of what's going on. So depending on what checks, any of the red stop signs, I need to look into them. Now, when you snapshot the information, just to give you a quick look, and then I will turn it back over to Nicole because I realize once again I'm talking too much. My apologies. So if I go and look at the information, we did look at this report, which gives you a very, very good indication of where are the issues? How many issues do I have to deal with? Now, if I was looking at activity validations and I had a couple yellows and everything else was green, hey, I probably have got this pretty well in hand. I'm not saying it's perfect, but pretty well in hand. Now, there's another report I wanted to just give you a look at as well. And this information from P6-QA can be run into, using P6 Reporter, run into Power BI and or connected to another tool. By the way, if you use, for example, Tableau, something like that, this is Power BI. It's giving you the DCMA checks and information in a little different format than what you had in that other report we just looked at for looking at the DCMA information. So you've got a lot of different options here. So on that note, what I will do, I will turn this back over to Nicole as soon as I get back to the meeting. There we go. And I will let her wrap this up here. So I will stop sharing and turn it back to Nicole.
Okay, thanks, Marilyn. Okay, so she gave us a excellent overview on the different types of quality metrics, the way that you use it. So our idea was to make it simple for the users so they can just use it right inside P6. So that's the way we wanted it put together. And then you can do various outputs. So we showed you live outputs into Power BI. We could push it into a report. So that's using those notebooks, and you can push it right into Word and send a report. So there's lots of different ways you can do it. And the key here is to, of course, increase your schedule quality. That's the objective, and not have to wait for stage gates and only look at it at those moments. Okay, not have a third-party tool that's very expensive that only a few people are allowed to use. Okay, so that was really our objective when we built this tool. So we've got different clients using it with different feedback, and the consistent feedback is that even if you're not a scheduler, you can understand the outputs. So one of our clients had their site engineers receiving schedule updates every week to 2 weeks, and they had a few hundred that were being submitted each month. So they needed a very quick way to get feedback to the contractor as to whether all the quality metrics were met. And they had a lot of special ones, calendars, different resourcing and roles. So they had a lot of special ones that they needed to adhere to. So this is an important thing, that you need to be able to run it quickly, get the feedback out, and get the standards up. That's the key thing. Okay, so when you get in this example that I'm talking about, when you get the contractor schedule, you can give feedback very quickly. Now, one of the projects that I worked on, we were working for an owner, and it was a project in New York City. It was a $600 million building that was being built. They didn't have any schedulers. They were a developer, and I was working for the CFO. So I was able to review his schedule, the schedule he received from the contractor, in less than 2 hours using P6-QA, and it was over 8,000 activities. So I was able to give him an idea right away that there was a lot of open ends, that the critical path didn't make sense enough to be able to continue the conversation and give the feedback to the contractor to get it updated. Okay, so this is the type of benefit for this kind of tool. So hopefully you got a bit of an idea of how, this sort of tool could be beneficial for your team. I didn't see any questions in the question room. So if you have any, throw them in, and we'll try and get them answered in the next few minutes. So this is one of many tools that we've put together. We've been working as a Primavera partner as Emerald for we're coming up on our 29th year. We're just finishing that off. So we've got a lot of different tools that we've built, and a lot of expertise around both P6 and contract management, of course, now Unifier, and the other tools in the toolkit, the risk tools, etc. So if you haven't been on our website, take a look. We've got lots of different add-ons for P6, P6 Loader that lets you load data in and out of Excel. We've just made some real improvements on that tool for loading templates that I've been using for this huge IT program I'm working on. So we'll be showcasing that in a few weeks. And we've got lots of other tools for you to look at if you're using P6 heavily and you want to make it work even better for you. Join some of our webinars, and they're upcoming. We've got videos of all our tools as well. And you can reach out to ask us if you have any more questions. So Donna's in the Philippines, so if you're closer to her time zone, you can reach out to Donna. There's her information. Mary Lynn, if you want to throw your email in the chat room, then people will have that as well. And feel free to reach out if you have anything that you want to talk to us about and understand more about the tool. I'll also put up a quick poll. If there is something that you do want us to follow up with, you can answer us via this poll, and that way we'll stay in contact in the most appropriate manner. Okay,